All right, welcome to Nashville, Tennessee Titans training camp with the man here, EVP and General Manager, Brian Carthon. Look, man, we were talking about it before we got on here online, and I'm thinking about, you just have such a great presence for this city. I'm so happy to see you in your world now, right? I'm watching you move around the field, daydreaming about back in the days, and I'm like, it's so amazing to see the evolution of all of us, right? And where you're going. I'm excited for you, of course. We haven't had a chance to talk a whole bunch over the last year and a half because you've been really busy. Let's talk a little bit about going into your second year as a general manager and going in with a second year quarterback and how important that is to the mindset of this organization and the culture. How does that affect the organization in general with a second year quarterback like Will Levis coming in?
Well, I tell you, and I'm not blowing smoke, so, I learned a lot from sitting back watching how you did when you came in first year GM, drafted a quarterback third overall, and just how you guys brought Matt along and showed the patience. And I think we kind of mirrored some of that. We had a unique situation. Will came in, second round pick. We had an established guy in Tannehill here. He was thrusted into the role probably a little sooner than we'd like, but you saw enough, to go off of. And the one thing that I learned from last season that's helping now is like how strong the emotion of hope is. Because at a point where he started that game against Atlanta, and it was like a movie script. It was alumni week here. So Miss Amy, flew in over 200 former Oilers and Titans. We had a member from the inaugural team of 1960 that was here. Warren Moon was here. Dr. Doom, Robert Brazil was here. And it was just crawling with legends. And we brought out, the Columbia Blues. And for that to be Will's first start, and he goes out, throws for 4 touchdowns, and so that was like a highlight, right? But then to not only go from there, but then he goes the very next week, short week, Thursday night game on the road in Pittsburgh, and still gives us a chance to win. I think Will went through about as many different scenarios and hardships, if you will, and just highlights that's going to help him navigate into this year. And so, as we were transitioning, looking for a head coach, one of the things you hoped it was that someone could see what you saw in Will and what he can be, if we continue to protect him and continue to surround him with weapons. And like I said, that emotion of hope is what's carried us from last season and into this offseason. And I think, us hiring Brian Callahan and the work that he's done with quarterbacks, I mean, you look at the earlier part of his career, he was with a Peyton Manning, he was with a Matthew Stafford, he's with a young Joe Burrow, he had Jake Browning, and what he's done with these quarterbacks, I think it's easy to say, Joe Burrow, Peyton Manning, and Matthew Stafford, but he's worked with other guys and got these guys molded into being players, and it makes you feel really good about going into a year 2 with Will.
And that's such a great feeling to know you have that quarterback you can build with. You feel confident, like you said, the hope, great point. And then you bring in some cats that you surround them, and I'm a big fan of Calvin Ridley, of course, right? That's one of the best route runners in the history of this game, and that's going to be fun to watch. His supporting cast be there, right? Where that's so important, right? I mean, how you surround him with the right people to help him evolve.
Yeah, and I think, again, it was one thing from just throughout all the years of being around this game, studying the game, everyone wants to have, Brett Favre and Peyton Manning and, Drew Brees and all the greats, the Hall of Fame guys, but God only made so many of them, right? And so when you have one and one that you believe in, you got to continue to surround him, with players. You got to put people in front of them to protect him. You got to put, guys around to get the ball to. I always tell Will before games, you don't have to be number one. You just need to be one of 11. Play point guard, get the ball into the hands of the people that score, and watch the show. And Will's a guy, he's dedicated, he's passionate, he's in here a lot. The one thing that stands out in my mind from this offseason alone is we hired the new staff, got everybody in for the first time having our first staff meeting, and Will Levis is the first person in the room, and he just came in and literally just came and introduced himself. Not, hey, I'm Will, waved to the room, literally shook every man's hand around the room and was like, hey, I just wanted to meet you guys, say hello, and he was off and doing his work. But that just shows you who he is and what it means to him. And, being able to get guys like Ridley had options. You know, he had options, and he could have stayed in Jacksonville where he was comfortable. He could have went other places that probably at that time were seen as having better rosters than ours. But it was something about being here that he believed in, you know, and I think our whole free agency class was that. Like, guys saw what we're trying to build. They got a feel for the people here. They know what this city and state bring, and they just wanted to be here.
One last question on Will and your relationship with Brian, that emerging relationship that you have with a head coach, right? How important that is. Well, I was going to talk about it a little bit later in this conversation, but just for this part of the conversation, how involved are you on discussing with Brian Callahan about, you know, how are we going to approach Will in the second year as far as reps? Is that something you as a general manager are involved with, or do you let that totally onto the head?
No, we've been talking about this probably, you know, once Brian got in, he got settled, and we were putting this thing together. Like, we're never not in communication. You know, from this summer, Brian's off with his family at his in-laws, you know, place in upstate New York, and he's like, "Hey man, my phone may not work, you know, the reception's bad, but here's the house number, here's the landline." And I was like, "I'm not calling you." And then he's still firing off texts, "Hey, what do you think about the rep count for, you know, what has been your experience?" So we're bouncing ideas off of each other, which makes me feel a part of it, which shows him that I have his back and I support him. You know, there has been some, you know, some things that have come up here recent where we've met with the coaches about the rep count of guys, you know, and me being able to say, "Hey man, like, I know what this looks like already. You know, can I get opportunity to see this?" And I think this will give me a clearer picture. And it's no question, there's no hesitation. It's like, okay, yeah, cool. Like, I see why, you know. And I was like, hey, if you need to see it, then that's fine. But I know what it looks like, so can I see, you know, A and B, you know. And we're bouncing these things off. We start every day in conversation, in talking. We end every night in conversation. What's coming up? How did we end the day, you know. And I know Brian well enough now to know when he needs his space. You know, I'm able to read him. You know, there were times where, you know, we're in the building, we're in a meeting, and I just look over at him and I'm like, "Hey man, go get with the coaches." And he's like, "Oh, I'm good." I'm like, "Nah, like, go." And it's vice versa. He knows when, if I'm in this big coaching staff meeting and I'm kind of checked out, he'll kind of look at me and like, "Hey man, you're good. You don't have to." So we took the time. It's kind of like marriage. You know, and you're with someone, you're living with someone for the first time, but it requires work. And so we've put the work in to get to know each other, and we're still working, and it's the ever evolving part of our relationship.
That's a great point where you know each other and you're growing and learning. The other thing that I always thought was you never want to rise to the level. If your partner there, your head coach and partner is up and fired up, I always felt it was important to stay down a little bit so that when I'm up, at least in my relationships with my head coaches, both Mike Smith and Dan, like, tried to work with making sure that Dan would stay down in that situation so that we weren't both rising, fired up, and trying to communicate.
No, and that's a great point, and that's how we are, and that's how we operate. You know, everyone sees, you know, Callie's cool, you know, laid back demeanor, and people that know me know I'm pretty chill, you know, for the most part. But Brian has that grit and that oomph to him that when it comes out, it catches your attention. You know what I mean? And I was joking with him. He let one out the other day at practice, and I was like, oh, I wasn't ready for it. But it's like you said, it's balance. So if I see he's running hot that day, then I get to come behind and say, hey man, you just understand where coach is coming from, you know, and vice versa. And I tell all the guys, you know, A-Rob, who was just here, and because even us using our guys in the building to be mentors to these players, like, hey, like, I will be the tough love dad, you know what I mean? And I'll be the guy that's getting after him, and you could be the cool uncle and come in and smooth things out. But it's like you said, it's a balance.
Love that. That's such a mature approach to it. And that's many years, right? Being around, a coach's son, right? We could talk forever about that. It's a whole other conversation. Let's switch lanes for a minute and let's talk about the league and emerging technology, generally speaking, nothing specific, but emerging technology, the fast-paced change of this league, the NFL. What is your mindset on that? Do you embrace it, or are you one that tries to keep it in perspective?
No, you got to embrace it, because your thing, and I'm seeing it now as it's written out, was to be ever evolving. and be ahead of the curve, and not try to play catch up and join in, but being ahead of the curve and having a plan. And so that's always been my approach. I remember, those times in Flowery Branch when this analytics thing was new, and it was almost like they were pitting the numbers and the data against old school scouting, so everyone resisted it. You know what I mean? Like, oh, that numbers can't tell me anything. And I don't think, I'll speak for myself, didn't fully understand and grasp, because a lot of stuff we were doing in scouting is analytical based anyway, but we didn't understand it because this was a certain way we were taught. For me, the breakthrough for me was going to San Francisco and being with a Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah, who's now the GM in Minnesota, and a Dimitroff Washington, who's his VP of operations, and a Brian Hampton, being with those guys and having these intimate conversations with Kwesi where he's like, hey man, like, I'm not trying to replace you as a scout. I'm just bringing the checks and balances of here's what the numbers say. And the example I always give, I probably said it a million times too many, to show you how we balanced it. There was a time, I can't remember what draft it was, but we were in the draft room. This was D'Amico Ryan's first year as D coordinator in San Francisco. And it was like, hey, we're going to give you a linebacker. And I think it was the 6th round. We're going to give you a linebacker in the 6th round. So D'Amico comes up, and we just have the tape rolling in the draft room, and Elijah Mitchell's tape is up. And, D'Amico's waiting. We're probably 2 or 3 picks from being on the clock. And he just starts looking at Elijah's tape, and he's like, okay. So hey, can you go get Johnny Holland, who's the linebackers coach? Johnny comes up now, Johnny's watching. And 3 minutes into it, he turned to Kyle, hey Kyle, like, I don't know if you wanted a running back, but this guy I'm watching is better than the linebacker we were going to take, But that comes from, Dimitroff Washington being able to, aggregate the data and say, hey, we're outside zone running team. Based on my numbers, Elijah Mitchell's the #1 outside zone running back in this draft. Now, Dimitroff comes to me. You would have to know Dimitroff's personality. He's like, I can't walk in this room and tell Kyle that this dude who's a later round pick is the best outside zone runner in the draft. He was like, have you watched him? I was like, I haven't. He was like, can you just buzz him and just tell me if I'm tripping? Like, if you think I'm tripping, I won't even mention it. So I watch him and I'm like, yo, this dude's a good player. And so it was collaborative from analytics, scouting, and coaching that gets us there. So we get to week 1, Raheem Mostert's our starter against Detroit. He goes down. Now Elijah Mitchell comes in, rushes for 100 yards, and he's our leading rusher that year, ran for 900 yards and 11 touchdowns.
So I love hearing that, because what it makes me believe, and it is that wave, right? The league is changing, it's evolving, of course, over the next 5 years, right? If you're not understanding how to utilize some of the data, you're shortchanging yourself, I believe, as an organization, right? And you have, it's your responsibility as a general manager to communicate with your head coach and the owner about the importance of that, right? Again, we always say in the business that I'm working in now, of course, it's not black box, right? At all. It's a supplementation, augmentation tool for a general manager to utilize, juxtapose, right? Cross-check a little bit. Like you've said, the subjective and objective side together is where we're going with this, right? And you can't be old school. You can be old school. We all can be old school. We love it. That's how we were raised. But we know we have to continue to grow on that. And by the way, is your department growing too? Like the data department? Do you have a group here, 2 or 3?
Oh yeah, we've grown significantly since I got here. When I first got here, we had 2 guys who built our system. We've now grown to probably we went from 2 to I think we're at about 7. Right now, but then we've been able to bring in, a guy like Scott Cohen, who's been one of the premier game management situation guys around the league, and the wealth of knowledge he has from a data collection standpoint and how to use the data. And so we've got Scott now here in a dual role where he's helping the coaching and he's helped tying in scouting because he has a scouting background. And then you have a guy like Chad Brinker, who comes in and he's forward thinking. He's been in the AI before most people were even talking about AI, and his background in being a former player, a former scout, by trade, but then being able to go to the Kellogg School of Business at Northwestern, get his MBA, and be in the room with a bunch of these bright minds from a technological standpoint. And so he's coming in with a lot of fresh ideas. And then, some of the things we've learned throughout the years of, watching you build relationships with other people outside of the different leagues. And we just had a presentation where we played a video of Sam Presti. I don't know who Sam Presti is. That was your friend. That was a guy that you brought in at the very front end of his career at Oklahoma City when he had just came from San Antonio. You had him around because those guys in the NBA were forward thinking at that time. And so I take that now upon myself where I reach out to different people from a bunch of different industries, the music industry, other leagues, private equity, just because these guys are on the forefront of a lot of things. And even here in this community, Nashville is becoming, a hub, in the technological space, as well as like healthcare and biotech. Like Oracle is moving their campus. They moved from the Bay Area to Austin, and now they'll be here, it'll be less than 10 minutes away from here at the facility. So this tech thing is growing and it's coming here, and we have to be able to take advantage of it.
I love that. I love that approach. Let's switch again here. You went through a lot of organizational change over the last 2 years, especially this year, right? Yeah. Going through that whole process of digging in and figuring out who your next head coach is going to be. That's a big deal, right? There's a lot going on there, so many different ways. What was your main takeaway that you might share with a rising GM executive or a rising executive in the league?
Yeah, I just say, from that standpoint, it was a lot, it happened on a Tuesday where we relieved Mike of his duties, and Friday we had our first interview. So that was all Tuesday night. Myself, A-Rob, and Chad, and Vin Marino, all Tuesday night, all Wednesday. I've never done a head coaching search before. So not only do you have to identify who the people are, you have to get the letters out, to get permission, but then you got to format this interview and what's important to you. And the one thing that we did that, and I don't mind sharing, I'm transparent, we came together and figured out what's important for us. What do we want to see in our next head coach? And I'll be honest with you, I reached out to some of our, cornerstone players. Hey, what would you like to see in the next head coach, whether for you individually and for this team? And I probably met with like 8 players, and I was like, hey, do me a favor, write it out and get it to me. And I went through it, and a lot of what they were looking for were things that we had already talked about in the room. And so we made ourselves, and again, leaning on scouting, we made ourselves a grading scale where we had kind of like critical factors and position factors. And we had those, I think it was like 10 things. And we just simply graded it, met expectation, didn't meet expectation. And with every interview that we had, we went down the list as every individual, we aggregated, and we just had a running score, of what resonated with us. And those people, moved on in the process. And again, it was a lot. We interviewed 9 coaches, over the course of a week, and then got rolling right into second interviews. Because if one thing for us, there was a lot of jobs open this year. And so again, it's talking about being at the forefront. We had to be, ahead of the curve and be able to identify, okay, who's our target, and let's go get it, and not wait and try to play these games. And so we were very like locked in that moment. And, again, just the way that we all worked together, because I had aspects of me that was going to help the interview. A-Rob had aspects, Chad, Burke Hill, we were all in the room, interviewing. And the cool thing that we did was like, Miss Amy said, hey, this part of the interview is football. Like, this is your space. You guys got it. And what we did was we would talk amongst ourselves, at the end, and then we call her and debrief her, hey, here's what we thought. And we had everything. We made sure that we sent it to her, and she was always in the loop. And, the first interviews were Zoom, so we were able to record them. So she was able to go back, and watch each guy and get a feel for him. And so by the time we got to the second interview and her and Kenneth were involved, then, they had a feel for the person already. And then now they were able to come in and do their part.
And I love the fact that you were interacting with your players. I mean, I think it's so important, again, appropriately, as you mentioned. And it's a confirmation, right, that you guys were exactly in line with where you were going, because I think it is such an important thing. And I'm sure these players really appreciate your interaction with them, right? Back to being the dude walking around here, cool cat, styling guy, by the way. Won't get into the styling.
No, we're not going to have that conversation.
But the reality is you have that, and I think that just goes in line with, being able to communicate with them. Last question, a little bit more personnel related, only about your first round draft pick this year. When you're talking about J.C. Latham and you're talking about again, like a quarterback, right? That first round pick, you want to decide how you want to put him in reps. How much will he be playing in preseason? Are you a believer in getting those guys like that in the middle of it? Work them fast, work them hard now, or is it an ease-in moment for you?
I think it's a certain level, right? So, one thing we talked about, and, using our old grading scale, those 7-0 and above guys, the label was first-year starter, and so when you're taking those guys in the top 10 and they're 7-0 and above, you want them to be first-year starters. The cool thing for JC, and, you heard that he had a good work ethic, and I personally think what we got from the school was understated. We signed J.C. Latham. His agent was here, Drew Rosenhaus, and they read through the contract. We signed and doing pictures and doing the whole dog and pony show. And the kid's kind of like doing this in the room, and so I'm like, J.C., what's up, man? He was like, are we done? I'm like, yeah, we're good. And he's like, all right, I'll see y'all. And he left. And so I was like, okay, he's over it. And then I look out on the field, 15 minutes later, he's running hundreds out here. And his routine was he did an OTA practice, met like with the rest of the team, and then he'd go in, he'd shower, get breakfast, get food or whatever. Then he'd go meet with his position coach by himself, and then he'd come out here and get extra work. And this was every single day. And it was to the point where I had to step in, again, understanding, knowing the data, like, hey, your workload. Like, I get that you want to, but hey, this is a marathon, not a sprint. We're trying to get to September. And so we had to put him on a pitch count of doing his own work. And, he still comes out here pre-practice. He has his own routine that he does. He has a post-practice routine that he does. He even took it upon himself to locate, Trent Williams and go spend a week with Trent this offseason in the break to go. And so, like, the kid gets it. He wants it. He wants to be good. And so for him, even he was he was a D lineman in high school that didn't move to O-line until like his senior year. Then he goes to Bama, he's just a right tackle. We drafted at 7 and we're putting him at left. So it's new to him. And so he wants as much work as possible. And I think our coaches do a really good job of, managing him. And what helps him is that he's next to a second-year guy in Peter Skoronski, who comes from that same ilk, that same makeup and wanting to be good. And I call Peter the young old man. He's a young guy, but if you see him walk around, he kind of lumbers and like just like an old man. But those two guys next to each other, man, it's going to be a beautiful thing to see, not only on the field, but watching them grow, and learn to communicate with each other and how they see the game. And then having a Lloyd Cushenberry next to them, who's been in the league now going on his 5th year, he'll be able to share the wisdom and the knowledge that he's gained. But for us, we want these guys to play when they're ready, and it's our job to get them ready. And I think, Bill, I call him Big Coach. I think Big Coach has done a phenomenal job, with JC and how much he's given him and knowing when to pull back. And JC's like he wants more. He's that guy, like I said, when he comes out and works on it in the afternoon, he's either working on something that he messed up on in practice or a technique that they're going to be using tomorrow. Like, I came off the field one day and I was like, hey man, how'd you feel? Because I was going somewhere because he gave up some stuff, and he was like, I messed up 3 times. And he knew each of the 3 times what he did wrong, who beat him, how. And when I went back and watched the tape, I was like, he was 100% correct. And he didn't need that from the coach. He knew it for himself.
You have one of the best offensive line coaches ever to coach this position, right? And the father-son thing, let's just finish with this. The bond that you have being a coach's son, right? We all have that, myself too. There's something about it. Is it, for lack of a better word, is it cool and heartwarming to watch them interact on the field and to think, wow, these two guys are spending some great time together at a point in their lives when not many people ever get a chance to do that?
No, it's beautiful. And that was a part of the interview. Interview process was, we're interviewing them, and then we get to the portion where we're talking about the coaching staff. And I'm like, hey, man, elephant in the room, is Pops coming? It'll be great. Like, is Pops coming? And to their credit, he was like, we hadn't talked about it. He has a job, and I'm trying to get a job. But to see them come together, and it's like when they're in the building, you don't know father son. You just see head coach, O-line coach. And it's like a beautiful thing. But then, like, outside of the game and having spent time around the family, we were just at Callie's house the other day for a pool party. and you know his mom's there and his dad is there, and it's like, and I'm sitting back like watching it, like, man, and there's son, there's daughter-in-law, there are grandchildren, and it's like a family affair. And you know, even for them, like as they transition to the holidays that are coming up, like now brothers and sisters can come in, and you got mom and dad that are here and brother over here. It's like, it's a beautiful thing. It's why we all do it. You know, I know the level of love and closeness you had with your father, you know the same for mine. And you know, we all would have loved to, you know, work with our parent, and actually be a part of seeing that happen. It's a beautiful thing.
Fantastic. Rand, thank you so much for spending the time.
No, absolutely.
I got chills thinking about it, because it's just the next wave, right? I'm stepping back a little bit, looking at the guys like yourself who this is your chance to get after, and I love it.
No, I appreciate you, man.
Really cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah,